Hey there, it's Alex from the Remote Work Life Podcast. I hope this finds you well, wherever you may be in the world. And today I have a special episode for you with a former colleague and manager of mine, in fact, Leon Richards. Leon is the managing director of Good Talent. And Good Talent is a professional search consultancy that drives growth, especially for values-led companies. And I used to work for Good Talent. Leon is based in Spain. He's a fully remote recruitment consultant, fully remote recruiter and professional. And Good Talent was one of the best times actually of my career. And I've known Leon for a number of years. We crossed paths many years ago, again in the world of recruitment. He's taught me many things, not just from the technical aspects of recruitment, but from the human standpoint as well. And that's why I wanted to have him on the show today. And in this conversation, we talk about a topic, a very hot topic in the world, let alone in the world of recruitment and hiring, and that is diversity. And in this episode, we just share some of our own thoughts, experiences, not just from a professional standpoint, but from a personal standpoint on the topic of diversity, because it's something that's really not just because it's topical, but because we feel, it's important and just want to keep a conversation going that is an important conversation, and hoping that it can help you as an individual or as a business to move your business forward or to move forward from a professional standpoint. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Leon Richards, who's the managing director of Good Talent.
I think businesses are literally falling over themselves right now, aren't they, to show how diverse they are and how...
Struggling to come up with an answer. Well, struggling to come up, one, with the answer because they don't have the metrics, they don't measure it. And two, when they do measure it, then the realization comes that, oh, wow, we've got a problem. And the problem tends to be in the middle to senior levels of organizations. There's just a dearth of diversity up there. It's still predominantly white male.
And do you get the question? Because I often get a question, or at least I often hear the question, how do you solve it? It's almost like I think people think there's almost like a silver bullet to solving diversity, or you just wave a wand, or you just set up a hiring program, and then all of a sudden you will be able to solve the number of people that come through your pipeline who you're recruiting. Yeah. And that's not the case, is it?
Nothing. There's a silver bullet that I'm aware of. They're all long, hard interventions that take effort and consistent effort over a long period of time. The recent conversations that I've had tend to highlight the fact that there's a dearth of diversity at the senior level. So what does that indicate? I mean, if I think back to a program we did with one of the government bodies, I won't name who, but we were brought in specifically to try and address diversity issue. They looked at the organization from top to bottom. They'd identified, actually, they were hitting their figures in terms of representation of the local community. So there was a diverse base of workers in the organization, in this government body. But they were all cleaners and at the lowest of the low level in a pyramidal hierarchy. So the problem was for them, how do we get more people at that senior level, almost near the top of the pyramid, people of colour, into the organisation? And you either got to build it over time, or you've got to buy it and bring it in and inject it into the senior level. Those are the sort of two key ways that I know it goes for whether you're female, black, Asian, whatever. It takes time to build people through an organisation. So the best way is a concerted effort to attract people at the entry stage of that talent pipeline within the organisation and grow them through the business. Otherwise, you're going to have to go and poach people and bring them into the business at a senior level. Can be done, but you've got the build versus buy question in terms of recruitment. As to efficacy, number one, and cost. It costs a lot to go and headhunt somebody in, and you can't headhunt somebody in based on colour anyway. going back to, I'm sure we'll cover equality versus positive action and positive discrimination. You can't headhunt people of colour in specifically anyway, so you might be able to track them and make them aware that there are opportunities, which is what we did for this government body. It was going out there banging the drum to people of colour and saying, look, these opportunities exist, we would welcome your application. But that's as far as it can go. You can't do anything else in terms of discrimination in the hiring process. So you've really got to be conscious about the long term and building an organisation for the long term. Unfortunately, not many businesses build anything for the long term, let alone thinking about diversity within their organisation over 10, 15 period. It's driven by, if you're a big listed company, it's driven by quarterly performance. You've got to make that profit. Long-term strategies, you could argue, take a back seat.
And was that project you worked on, were they able to implement something that either buy it in, or was it a long haul for them?
They were really happy with the results, and the results were geared around applications. Can we, as you say, build that pipeline at the front end of applications? And, when we were encountering overcoming prejudice on people of colour side. Why would I want to work there? It's Babylon. It's not somebody there. Why would I want to go into the heart of the beast? Through to, wow, I'm really, really, really pleasantly surprised that this action has been taken to encourage me to apply. So there was a whole spectrum of responses that I got from that proactive campaign, shall we say. But we were targeted on, can we get that funnel built at the front end? It stops there because you can't do anything else in terms of recruitment process without stepping over the lines of the law. So it worked well. Organisations can and couldn't do this. It sits within the positive action camp, I think, in terms of legality. So it's certainly something that can be done. Not many people do it, though, because not many people take diversity seriously, really seriously. It's ticking the box exercise.
Yeah, and that plays
not
out.
Everybody. I'm generalizing.
That lack of taking diversity seriously, it plays out in how people go about hiring, because typically what you see, even if they're using a recruitment agency, it's the same thing. I mean, how long ago did you start in recruitment? I mean, ever since I've started in recruitment, I've seen businesses use the same tactics, literally advertising the same places, and not kind of think to themselves, actually, if we take some positive action in a certain direction, or things are not, I don't know, recruitment doesn't seem to be, what's the word, evolving. It's evolving in terms of the tech, but not in terms of like people's thought process, in terms of how to use the tech to best acquire the people. Would you agree?
Well, technology or a tool is only as useful as the person that's using the technology or the tool, and if those attitudes haven't developed, then you'll still be using, instead of using a hand saw, you'll be using an electric saw to cut down the same trees. You've got to go to different parts of the forest and look at different parts of the trees. I had this conversation, I kid you not, 2 weeks ago with a client. I was hired in to do some work just at the early stages in terms of this sifting and assessment and presenting a long list, and we presented somebody with African heritage, and I remember, and the CEO said to me, look, Leon said to me after the event, I remember he said he would not have looked at that CV without me pushing and making him aware that there was more to this individual than met the eye. Now, this wouldn't discount someone on the CV. You couldn't tell on the CV what colour he was, he or she was, but there was a prejudice in terms of hiring in their own image, which tended to be white. The business is staffed by white, middle class, university educated backgrounds. And if you're going through a sift on a CV, that's naturally what your bias will be. Your unconscious bias will be oriented to looking for the same, and the cultural fit, in that sense of cultural fit, And they would have discounted this individual first round. As it happened, best candidate for the job, got offered the job, took the job. They even had the conversation with him saying, look, we are aware that you would be the only black person within this organisation if you join us. Will that cause you a problem? And the individual said, maybe it would cause a problem for some of my friends, but not for me. So I think the fact that this company, and a lot of it perhaps you could trace back to Black Lives Matter, this conversation started in boardrooms of organisations, that something needs to be done, but people don't know what and don't know how. Well, that's the next step. I'm not too worried about that. There's help and we'll all find a way forward. But the key thing is this conversation started, and that I think is one of the great benefits of the Black Lives Matter movement, was to start that conversation. Not everywhere, but it's opened the space for the conversation to be had. To the point where we're getting Millwall fans booing, people taking a knee, and you've got Conservative MPs basically being apologists for those Millwall MPs, and the right wing, traditional right wing, let's say capitalists, are scared and are painting Black Lives Matter as Marxists and socialists, and completely muddying the water and losing focus of what this is all about in terms of equality, equity, fairness, justice. Perhaps it's not in their interest to let go of the power that they've held so tightly for 400 plus years.
And so you think then Black Lives Matter? I mean, I think that it's. I still have mixed opinions about Black Lives Matter, because there doesn't seem to be a clear message, or at least they're not communicating their message in a way that can be understood by everybody. But what I do appreciate, I suppose, is that it's provoked the conversation. It's provoking conversations. It's causing people to think differently about all different aspects of life. But I'm beginning to get the feeling. I mean, as much as I don't like, I suppose I don't like it when it's conflated with Marxism and fascism. All these kinds of things. How do you then? I suppose, because I get the question quite a lot. I hear the question a lot. How do you then start to use that message, or at least that impetus gained from the Black Lives Matter movement, in a way that it doesn't seem as though you're trying to break down doors, and because that's the image that people have of Black Lives Matter, isn't it? It's an image that's created by media. How do you then use that for good?
There's a ton of stuff in there. So
yeah, sorry.
Think back to the 60s. Well, no. Think back to the 60s. Take Martin Luther King. Take Malcolm X. Now, the objective of both, I would suggest, was similar. The routes that they were pronouncing on taking were different to get to a similar sort of outcome. But the coherence with which Martin Luther King spoke, I think, was symptomatic of the time frame they were in. It's the 60s. There was a few media channels. It was, it sounded more coherent. Going back to what you were saying, if you look at Occupy Wall Street, there were a million different voices, but that's because there's more people in the planet, and we all have our own way of communicating, and we're our own media channels in a lot of respects. So I think the coherence is lost, or can be lost, as a consequence of the technology and the time frame and space that we're in right now in 2020. The message, I think, is quite similar. Conflating with socialism, Hit this head on would be my suggestion. If Martin Luther King was as hated by the white community as Malcolm X. It was an uppity black person demanding rights and equality. That was beyond the pale. It's not working within the system. Martin Luther King wasn't working within the system. He was pushing it from outside, and anybody that's doing any pushing from outside on the system is going to get kicked back and is going to get resistance and get shot, as both of them did in the end. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with confronting this head on. I mean, the basics of the Black Panther movement was a Marxist socialist movement. I think it was a Marxist socialist movement in response to the fact that slavery is economics at its heart. Why take 10 million black people from Africa? It's because you can get them to work for free and make profit from the sweat of their brow and their labours. There's nothing more than economics. It's happening now, with sweatshops in Vietnam and originally China, that their wages have gone up, so it's cheaper now to do it in Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia. It's exactly the same. It's a capitalist drive for profit that goes around the globe over the course of 500 years, seeking the cheapest production means and making profit in the process. As a consequence, back in the 60s, the only real solution to that is the opposite of capitalism, which is socialism and Marxism. So hit it head on with really what it was all about in terms of the Black Panther movement was we've got to redress the inequalities in capitalism. And I think this is what a lot of the problems in the world come down to. I'm not saying I'm anti-capitalist. I'm not saying I'm socialist and Marxist. What I am saying, there are inherent problems within our current guise of capitalism that are causing devastation to the planet in terms of our ecology, that has caused devastation to our planet in terms of peoples, race, women. It's left a legacy of pain and left a legacy right now of inequality on all counts. We've got 1%, the 0.1 of the 1% owning 60-70% of the production and the money and the goods of the world. Is that right? Is there any need for hunger right now? No. As Gandhi said, there's enough for every man's need, but not for every man's greed. It's a problem of distribution. Now, that is, I guess, a socialist comment, a problem of distribution. But it's true. If we've got enough for everybody to not be hungry, why are people still hungry? And why are people still hungry in a developed nation like the UK or the USA? It's because the government has chosen it to be that way, I would suggest. So hit it head on. It's part of a bigger, for me, this is all part of a bigger issue. How do we as humanity organize ourselves on planet Earth for the benefit of who? Is it a utilitarian view for the benefit of the many, or is it for the benefit of a few? It's the age-old question of how does a society operate, and who's in charge of that society, who benefits from that society. I think COVID has highlighted the deficiencies in this capitalist system that we've got at the moment. Something's going to have to come afterwards that's perhaps a little bit different. The third part of your question, yes. What do we do about it? In terms of going back to specifically around, let's say, race, colour, and the recruitment process. Going back to what we talked about, that's a long-term project. I don't think it can happen in isolation without these wider changes going on. Otherwise, it will only ever be a tick box exercise. Do you have representation? And I think it's important not to miss the fact of why you want diversity within an organization, and the data, the theory, the research shows that diversity of thought when dealing with problems better solutions. If you've got everybody that sees the world in the same way, they've been to the same schools, they've been to the same universities, they've been to the same businesses early on in their careers, inevitably you're going to end up with a similar way of seeing the world. Now, that's great for coherence, as you say. It's not very good for dealing with out of the ordinary situations. It's not very good for coming up with new solutions to problems. It gets you the same thing that's happened before and happened before that. That's conservatism, I believe, or sorry, coherence. It's the same way of looking at things and keeping the same way of doing things. Now, if you want diversity of thinking to deal with problems, you've got to have diversity of backgrounds and views and world experiences within the organization. So that Cornel West came up with a great quote in terms of, we've had black faces in high places. We've had Obama, but Obama's a Chicago educated lawyer that will have a view of the world that's not too dissimilar to another Chicago educated lawyer. There's no real experiential difference there. He's had a middle class upbringing and a privileged upbringing, but where's the view from somebody that's struggling to put the dollars together to pay the rent? It's that kind of difference of perspective that allows us as humanity to deal with curveballs, deal with problems like COVID, and come up with a solution to them. So that bigger picture of a view of diversity, I think, is really important. It's not just a black face or an Asian face or a female face. Mm-hmm. It's actually the thinking and how that world is viewed by the individual that's more important than I would suggest than the colour of one's skin.
So if I'm a hiring manager, if I'm a business, I've got, I don't know how many people in that business, and I just want to make a start, shall we say. I can't change the world in my next hire. I can't all of a sudden make my workforce or my board diverse overnight. Where do I start? I mean, where do you start? Because there's so many things in there. There's just so many things to consider. And I think I get the feeling lots of people are confused as to what to do next. Where would you start?
No. For me, I'd start with the why. So I link this back to my work recruiting with purpose-led, mission-driven, sustainable companies. I segment, as you well know, the market. We looked at this. How do we segment this market of sustainable companies? And there was that clear segmentation between head and heart. Organizations that do good because it's the right thing to do for them, and organizations that perhaps tick a box because they need to tick a box to operate their business in the current paradigm. You can apply that, I think, to diversity. Why do you want a diverse workforce? First question. Is it because you need to tick that box to operate as a bank or as a telecoms company because that's the law? Or is it because it's something that you believe and you actually want diversity of thought in the organization? You want to represent your customers within the organization truly. You want to represent the place in which your business operates in terms of the local community genuinely. I think that will lead you to perhaps different ways of approaching the problem, whether it's what we would call greenwash, I guess you could call it diversity wash, tick in the box approach, versus doing something genuinely. And doing something genuinely is much tougher. Tick in the box ends up with the classic token.
Yeah. Yes, you introduced me to token, didn't you? And the token, yeah, nobody wants to be a token at the end of the day or feel that way. And yeah, I think, you do have to start with that question, don't you? And you have to have a process. It just seems that so many, hopefully I'm not generalizing here, but it just seems that so many people, like I said, was saying before, is that they're approaching their recruitment in the same way, doing the same things, using the same recruiters who work in the same way as well. And you have to, I think people, what you're talking about in terms of the starting with the why, I think that's how you want to be perceived and what you think and how you work, how you operate, all those sorts of things. I suppose my next thing is what would a process then? What after you've sort of had that discussion, and you probably talk with other people in the business, wouldn't you, as well? And how would you set up your process then to make that work for you?
Yeah. I mean, if that's come from the top in terms of a why and a conscious acknowledgement that some action needs to be taken, it is a difficult conversation to have, even if you've got people of colour within the organisation already. If you've got no people of colour within the organisation, then it's a really difficult conversation to have, even more so. So I would suggest the first thing to do after agreeing that the why is the right thing to do is then have some sort of awareness training program for existing employees to make sure that it's like inviting somebody to dinner. When the door is opened and that person is invited to the table, that the table is welcoming for that individual. And that requires, in the first instance, that everybody gets involved. So I would suggest within an organisation, everybody understands why you're looking to increase diversity in the organisation, why it's important, what it would mean, what are the benefits. Like everything, you need to make a business case as to why steps and actions are being taken. It will depend on the organisation how far that conversation goes. Some are quite authoritarian. It's decisions are made at the top and driven down the business without much engagement throughout the rest of the business. Other organisations are wholly embraced, and everybody from top to bottom would be engaged in that conversation. But if you want to be successful, then everybody, I would suggest, needs to be on board and understand why these actions are being taken and why it's important for the business. That would be the first step before you even think about going out into the marketplace and trying different methods or slightly more conscious methods, shall we say, of recruiting with that outcome in mind. But the second step after the why is to make sure everybody's singing from the same hymn sheet internally. And that's where a lot of the diversity and inclusion training comes in. There are some good trainers out there that would be able to facilitate those conversations within a business and within an organisation, to help them open that space.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, it's a long process, and I think you have to be vested in it, don't you? But that's basically what you're saying. Be vested in it, communicate as well. I think that communication is going to be, once you're in a situation where you can go out to market, communication is probably going to be more important than it ever has been, isn't it? Because there's so much information, there's so much, people are working online a lot more. There's already a lot of hiring. Well, I say a lot of hiring, but hiring is one of those things that is quite transactional in some cases, and adverts seem the same. So that communication is going to have to be even better than ever, wouldn't you say? Because your why is why you stand out as a business and as a team and whatever it may be. But in order to differentiate yourself and not come across as that diversity wash, you have to have that really nailed on, don't you? You have to have that really sort of, how do you put it? I don't know.
To be authentic, you've got to be.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah,
it is part of that employer brand.
That
the brand of the organisation from an employment perspective, and you'll see, most large organisations, if you go to their employee section on the website, you will see a white face, a female face, an Asian face, a black face. But does it feel authentic? Are the figures there in terms of how many females are at certain levels within the organisation, how many black people there are, how many Asian people there are? Is the transparency, which hopefully legally people will be required now to start, well, not now, but shortly, based on legislation that's been proposed, organisations over a certain size will have to declare diversity figures within the business. And if you're then approaching it from a job seeker's perspective, I know it's always difficult to suss out whether somebody's truly authentic and genuine or whether it's not. But least you've got a starting chance if a company's taking the effort to invest in their employer brand and be welcoming in their employer brand, and they're open and transparent with their figures. You've got, I would suggest, a better than a 50-50 shot that they are being pretty genuine about it. So it's important that, as you say, it's communicated well, it's communicated through as many channels as possible. But it doesn't just come down to advertising. When it comes down to the nuts and bolts of the recruitment process, it's going to be networks, it's going to be the search process in some cases. You're not just going to rely on an advert seen in the national media or a prominent job board. That's not going to cut it anyway. In most cases for recruitment these days, you're going to have to be a little bit more proactive about it. But you're right, communication needs to be consistent, it needs to be clear, and it needs to have, I would suggest, some genuine authenticity about it when it comes to diversity and why it's important for the business.
Mm-hmm. And that consistency in communication, I think, I was looking at definitions the other day of candidate experience, and literally every definition of candidate experience that I came across was the candidate's perspective of your brand, your employer brand, during the recruitment process. From my opinion, I don't know if this is a common perception of candidate experience, but I think candidate experience is more about what, not just during the hiring bit. It's what people think about your business. Is your business attractive to them even before they start hiring? It's like, is it the kind of business that you think to yourself, actually, when these guys start to hire, I'd like to, be part of that team? Because it seems as though the definitions of candidate experience are very short-termist.
Well, as we just talked about in terms of slavery and economics, you can extend relevance out as far as you want. I think you're right, though. It comes back to that why a business exists. Does that resonate with a particular candidate? That should be the key. If an organization is doing good in the community and that's what excites an individual, or is involved with maybe footwear, that's what excites an individual, then there will be a resonance to what the business does that will naturally attract some type of people that have an affiliation with the why of the organization, or what the organization does. There are other types of organizations that will attract people that are interested in how an organization works as well. Organizations that are cutting edge, organizations that are trying different ways of working perhaps might be attractive to certain types of individuals that are looking for work process and how to work just as important as the why and the what the work is. So it all extends out into the employer brand, what the business does, how the business does it, why the business does it. Then it then becomes, I think, more tactile at a granular level when you get down to the recruitment process, the recruitment experiences, what's said, how you treated, how you engaged with, feedback, etc., etc., etc. That's the sharp end of the recruitment process that naturally people will focus on. But it should be consistent with the bigger brand. It's a sub-brand. Why recruitment doesn't sit under marketing in a lot of respects, I don't know. It sits under HR, but it's got so much to do with the branding element and the marketing element that at least there needs to be joined up thinking when it comes to employer brand.
Yeah, one. I don't know if you come across any companies that do this, but one way of doing this. But again, it's about not being short-term in your thinking and just thinking, oh no, we've got a role coming up, we need to advertise it somewhere, is by, and it kind of links to what you were saying about consistency, is just having sort of like events where members of your team or hiring managers just come and talk about the business or talk about their experience, so you can kind of see for yourself within the business, because obviously as a job seeker, it's not easy to understand what goes on, but it would help if employers would actually engage in that way, so that it becomes easier for on one hand for the job seeker, and them on the other hand when it comes to the time to press the button and start the recruiting. So think 6 months in advance, 1 month, 6 months of 1 year in advance, all that kind of thing before you actually start your recruitment process.
Oh, I guess you're talking about a talent pool, building
exactly,
talent pool out before you need it. But you've got to be cognizant of the fact that it takes time, money, and resource to do that. And unless you are an organisation that does workforce planning or consistently knows it's going to need X amount of this type of people each year, then the MBA recruitment program was perfect example of that. I used to work at Warwick with the MBA team there, and we would have university relationships with organisations, big corporate organisations that knew that in Europe they might need to take 50 MBAs a year. Therefore, they, as a corporate company, would invest the time to build the relationships with different universities throughout the course of the year. They'd come and do events, come and do shows. They'd perhaps invite MBAs that were interested in them to their premises to see what they do. And you almost had a 12-month engagement period or even a 6-month engagement period before offers were made and things worked out that way. Now, that takes a lot of time and effort and resource, so you've got to make sure there's a good yield in terms of cost and benefit, but you can do it in a lighter touch way in terms of keeping people up to date with organizations, newsletters, what's going on, regular, using a basic CRM tool, regular updates does keep you front of mind when it comes to a potential employee. And they feel special and they feel loved in the process as well. That somebody's taking the care and the time to articulate we're interested in your profile type, not now but maybe in the future, and let's keep in touch, and doing it in a structured way. Doesn't need to be anything more than that, and that can be cost effective and time effective and yield great results.
And looking ahead, 2021, I mean, recruitment's changing all the time. We talked about tech briefly, and the way that people are thinking about recruitment, diversity, all that sort of thing. Are there any other things that you see as important things to consider for 2021 beyond that as well? That hiring managers listening to this, or HR, whoever it may be listening to this, should consider as part of their efforts to get people into their business?
Genuinely, we perhaps have that conversation at another time, because I honestly can't see 5 feet ahead at the moment with COVID, with what's going on in the economy. I really, I'm struggling I know my business has to adapt, has to change, but it's still too muddy a water for me to confidently say I'm going to take a bet on adapting to this future or preparing for that future, or even putting the effort in to create this kind of future. It's just such a mess in my mind, such a mess in reality as well, with absolutely everything that's going on at this point in time this week. We've got mutant COVID, we've got Brexit looming, we've got furlough extended till April, we've got retail brands collapsing left, right, and I don't know. There are some areas that are doing well right now. Logistics is doing well, IT is doing well, but I think actually we're probably, my gut, if there is any kind of confidence, I think we're going through a bigger shift in terms of how work happens and what work happens right now than most people realize or understand. It's not going to probably come out in the wash for another 12, 18, 24 months in terms of once we get through the end of it. But the world's going to be radically different, and that will demand radically different ways of working and supporting work. So I couldn't tell you, Alex. Let's have this conversation again in 2 years' time.
Let's do it.
But then we'll be looking backwards and forwards, so there won't be any good with it.
Well, we can have another conversation which is more, I suppose, focused recruitment. Well, we can talk specifics in another podcast episode. But Leon, I just wanted to say thank you. I was going to say, what are your plans for the next couple of months or the next few months or so? Anything on the horizon for you?
Get through Christmas, I think, first. So we're lucky, where I am here, we can have up to 10 people in this part of the world. So we're going to spend Christmas together, and I'm going to switch off. I'm not going to think about work until January, and we'll see what happens then.
Brilliant. Well, Leon Richards of Good Talent, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure, Alex. My pleasure.
And please come back soon.